IVM.
This is Audiogyan, and I am your host, Kedar Nimkar. Welcome to a deep dive into the minds of luminaries from the Indian creative world. Today we have Dharmesh Ba with us on Audiogyan. He's a product designer turned user researcher committed to building delightful digital services for India through research and design. He's currently building a research team at Udaan and Thousand Faces Club, which we'll talk about at the last, and it definitely demands an Audiogyan case study. Dharmesh is from NID. So welcome Dharmesh to Audiogyan, and yeah, it's a real pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Kedar. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here too.
Awesome. So yeah, I discussed offline a couple of times. I'll start by setting the context, saying that I'm an instinctive designer and mainly dealt with B2C products whom I am a power user. So I would say user research is something which I've not really gone in depth, but really understand and value its power. So I wanted to pick your brains and know from you, since you're passionate about research and plus designing for India. So it's all the more fun. And yeah, the topic for the day is like designing bottoms up for India. So I've come up with quite a few questions and let's see how it unfolds.
Sure, let's go for it.
Awesome. So I would start by asking, how do you define your work? Because in my worldview and wherever I've worked before, user research typically happens in a silo, and it's really tough to prioritize those learnings and those insights into mainstream roadmap. So if you can start by setting context, how has your journey been and how has your research and insights helped organizations?
Sure. Let me start by answering the first question. How do I define you? That's a very existential question. Earlier, I used to have different terms to define me. Today, if an HR asks me, I'll say a different thing. If a founder asks me, I'll say a different thing. And definitely, if my mom asks me, I'm going to say a completely different thing, right? But largely, I'm going to put it under the bucket of what I call user research. But the user research term is also, like you said, that it's very ambiguous. What does it mean? A product manager feels that they should be doing it. A founder thinks that they already know it, and a designer thinks that it's been already done in some way or the other. So it's like an elephant in the room, right? And everybody's trying to deconstruct it piece by piece. I feel like a good user researcher would enable everybody in the team to understand the people that they're building for better. So very recently that we had a session by Don Norman in Design Up for Cause event. One of the profound things that he said was a designer should not be doing things, but should be enabling people to do things. And I believe the similar manner, a researcher should enable other people to actually understand. Of course, yes, their contribution would be there, but I believe a lot in democratizing research.
Yeah, right? But sorry to interrupt, but this, I mean, if everybody is empowering, then who's actually doing it? Because I did a Audiogyan recently with Nishant Chaudhary, who's a product manager and sort of a senior. He's heading the design at Freight Tiger. And he was saying product managers have to be really like a mirror, just reflecting everybody and then empowering or just moving things around so that everybody can do their stuff. Now, even designer does that. And it's a classic problem of how do you define that blurring lines between product and design. So you just double click on that point, that what do you mean by empowering or what do you mean by enabling?
Yeah, sure. So for example, design research or user research has different forms and shapes, right? So for example, some of these sort of research are very generative in nature, which means you have an abstract problem statement. Let's take a simple example of, let's say, Swiggy wants to get into a completely new product, or they would like to get into a completely new market. Now, this is a problem statement that the business team would like to understand, or like the product team would like to understand a different way. The marketing team would like to understand a different way. You could collect the requirements, or you can say understand their opportunity statements from all these different stakeholders and design a research that would satisfy all these three stakeholders and go ahead and execute the research. Now, most cases, what happens is the researcher kind of thinks that, their job starts from taking the requirement and coming back with a PDF report. Now, that's a problematic thing because you don't know what is the success of the research. When I say people should empower them, which means your insights that you're bringing back should weave beautifully into all these three different stakeholders' life, and they should be able to convert some of these insights into something measurable or tangible, right? For example, the marketing person should be able to take these insights and should be able to build better product positioning. And the product team should be able to take these insights and build better user experience. The business team should be able to take this insight and come up with a better sort of business model or
Sales
revenue
plan, whatever.
metrics or whatever. Yeah. So when I say empower, so the insights doesn't stop when you share the presentation or PDF. You should be able to create, let's say, I do a lot of engaging workshops with these different teams to problem solve along with them, right? So which means that, the research that I did is actually getting converted into something meaningful. That is what I meant by they should empower, right? So research is not about just going and talking, but is also converting some of the ideas or the themes that we picked up from the ground into weaving meaningfully into the product.
Interesting. And I mean, I'm slightly taking a detour, but
Sure.
how then, like, these workshops, you basically try to articulate better or to explain the nuances, or generally drive that emotion which you have found out from the users? And then, I mean, why do you need these workshops? Like a PDF or like a good walkthrough or a small demo wouldn't suffice?
So first you start with the presentation. The presentation is generic enough that it can actually excite all the different stakeholders. Now the workshops, I call it a workshop and not a presentation, because it's you're collaboratively problem solving there. Unless the stakeholder themselves agree to come on board and also solve the problem along with you with the insights, or it could be personas or the teams that you derive from the field work, they'll not be able to take it forward. So how much can you understand people from just seeing a presentation, right? Okay. So these workshops are collaborative in nature, right? So at the end, that they've also, it's like the IKEA effect, right? Once they put in the effort into doing something, they find it much more closer to them. Otherwise, sometimes it also becomes a tussle between saying whether you know it better or I know it better types, right? I want to avoid that. I want to make them as a part of the process. And that's what I meant by empowering collaborative workshops, etc.
Mm-hmm. And your articles reflect sort of, at least I feel it's like real India. Be it this article called as like the India loves FD and they need a digital makeover, or the old one, slightly older one, which was like designing better user accounts for Indian families. Can you tell us a bit about like which is this India that you're exploring, and some interesting stuff that you mentioned offline about it?
Right. So as I read more about them, talk more about them, I feel I understand less. Right. My understanding was 1 year back is probably different from what I understanding is now. But I can talk about it at an overview level, but it'll be very difficult for me to exactly pinpoint and say numbers and stuff like that, because I've been trying to get to that level where I can talk about certain demographics and put some number to it. Who are the different segments that I'm talking about? Everybody has a different viewpoint, and I'm very much looking for this year or the next year census data that would come up, because it will give me much closer to what. So roughly, let's think about it where. So let's take the top 100 million users, roughly, right? People who are well educated, who have the ability to actually go for graduation, higher education, and all of it. So who understood English, who came from a very affluent background. Now they shared a common sort of behavioral traits, right? So for example, a very affluent family from either from Chennai and Maharashtra they could have a lot of common things in starting from the movies that they watch, the journals that they read, and all of it. So earlier when internet just became popular in India, we were building mostly for them because they are the ones who have the access, right? So which means that, you started building a lot in getting inspired from the West. So for example, they had Amazon and we started Flipkart, right? So we had similar services, which was catering to what I call like a very affluent sort of a class. Right. Now, in 2015 and 2016, the shift happened when Jio came into picture and everybody started getting access to internet. So two things, right? One is mobile phones prices started coming down. And second is the affordability in the internet space. So a combination of these two when then were a lot of first-time internet users, right? Or what the usually the startup term is the new internet users who came online for the first time because they surpassed a lot of other ways of how we probably used internet. We would have used it through dial-up connections and broadband, and then we came to mobile phones and mobile internet. These people surpassed all of it. They primarily jumped on to the mobile internet for the first time, and they brought along a lot of interesting their own culture to it, their own language to it, right? Now when you landed here, you're just flooded with apps which are probably not relevant to you, right? They're more, let's take a simple example of Instagram. So what does Instagram promote? Instagram promotes a certain kind of aesthetic. The algorithm itself promotes a certain kind of aesthetic. For someone who is coming from a very emergent class, to create that aesthetic is close to impossible. Wherever I place probably my camera phone in my home, it's not going to look as great as somebody who's seen this in US, UK, or wherever it is, right? So, but they need a completely sort of a different platform where they feel home. And that's where the opportunity of share chat comes into picture, right? And and also the intention of why they come online is also quite different from an emergent class to an affluent class, right? In the book Next Billion Users, Payal Arora talks about a very interesting sort of a theme which I really love, where she talked about saying people from the West came online to actually connect with the friends that they already knew offline. Right. So that is why Facebook promoted a lot into authenticity. If you can't have two profiles, and if they get to know that the same person is operating two profiles, it is not they don't get banned, I guess, but it's looked down upon, right? So they promote authenticity. But whereas she talks about the people who are coming from the developing countries, they wanted to get online to actually make new friends. Right. So that was a twist in the tail, right? So they wanted to surpass the existing social barriers. It could be their caste, it could be their community, it could be their economic inequality. They wanted to sort of come across that and connect with new sorts of people. But these platforms never really appreciated that, right? Because Facebook was built with the idea of saying that, connect with your existing, all the colleagues, or sorry, the students or your friends that you already knew, right? It started from colleges, right? But if you look at ShareChat, I don't know how many of us have actually deeply understood ShareChat. I really love that. I also almost think it's like a beautiful art, because in ShareChat, I don't think that it has a concept of private profiles. Every profile is public, right? And there is a singular feed, and the app opens with different languages, and once you enter into a language, it's a completely different world. Now, the content that you see from Hindi is completely different from English, to completely different from Punjabi to completely different from Malayalam, right? So once you enter, it's almost like switching a TV channel. Once you enter, you see only that sort of a content. It's very relatable. It's their film stars, it's their daily soaps, it's their sort of memes that you actually see, right? And I was once talking to a product manager from ShareChat, and I found something very fascinating, is that all the usernames were not really like a direct username, right? You wouldn't see like Kedar written anywhere. You would probably see Divya, but the Divya would have a lot of glyphs and a lot of emojis as a part of their names, right? So I probably asked the product manager, why is this behavior? And they said they don't want to really reveal, and yet they want to sort of interact, right? So you wouldn't be able to find who's that person who's actually talking. And even the DPs that you see, either it's a avatar, or it could even be their DP, or all you could see is just their eyes.
Right? Wow, very interesting.
So they're creating a new sort of an identity, and that actually works in ShareChat, right? And ShareChat actually introduced a feature like Clubhouse even before Clubhouse became famous. Right? The reason is that you want two people to connect, but you can't connect through text, because text requires a lot more thinking, like a very literate sort of a thinking. You need to compose them into words and type them beautifully. And let's say if you're not very comfortable with English, our existing keyboards don't give away, right? And you can't connect them through video also, because of like this privacy, social barriers, and all of it. You don't want, let's say if you're a woman, you don't want your family members to know that they're talking to somebody else, right? So that's why they came up with this concept of audio chat rooms. Right? And you had different audio chat rooms where there were, even today, if you go, there are different topics. There are people talking, like even on the night, if you go 12 o'clock, 2 o'clock, you'll see people talking about topics. Like, most of them, if on the morning, if you go, you'll see astrology topics being talked about. Evening, if you see, like, there are boys and girls hanging out. It's a completely different world, right? So that's what I meant by, This is the difference between designing a Facebook and designing a chat.
But sorry, I'll come back to this point. But just to connect to the earlier point is, then do you think? And actually, this is like a very classic question for myself, and I've been grappling with for some time. Is that when you design for these sort of people, then you know their behavior, and then you are sort of designing for them. Doesn't it make a bit clinical? Because then, I mean, at Audiogyan, I also speak to artists and musicians and filmmakers, and then there is a classic question that should your art reflect society, or should the society learn from art, or like look at art? To that, Varun Grover gave a classic example that you're not designing or making art in silos. You're making art within the community. So it's all reflection and give and take. But in user research also, it happens the same, that you want to empower them to do stuff better, because design is finally, it's a task that you want them to do it. If you do it from their perspective, it will become very clinical, right? Where will you add your own? Yeah.
When you say clinical, what does it mean?
Another cliche, which is that if you want iPhone, I'll give you iPhone, and then nobody will think of iPad.
Oh, like that. Right. So, I mean, it's very difficult to put that in a singular box. Let's say, for example, why haven't we been able to achieve certain sense of, like, say, financial freedom, or let's say financial inclusion across the different countries, across the country, sorry, right? Why haven't been able to achieve financial inclusion across the country? Because structurally, there is a lot of challenges, right? So for me, as an individual sitting in Bangalore, there are like hundreds of banks calling me to give credit card when I don't need a credit card. Right? There are tens and thousands of apps which are giving me loans where I don't need a loan, right? All based on a certain credit score that I own. But who actually needs is probably a small business owner, or a farmer, or a daily wage worker, or a house help who is probably really in demand of all of these loans, right? So the traditional way of doing finance probably didn't really cater to them, because they didn't really care to understand them, because each of their life is slightly different, right? And we were not being able to do in the traditional ways of sort of like, evaluating them, right? Forget like giving them like a new sort of mental model. Existing models itself, it's very difficult to reach them. That's the challenge. And all I'm saying is, technology can be used to take some of the privileges that only the elite class has to across the country, is what I'm saying, right? So it doesn't have to be something new, but technology can make it much more accessible, feasible, is my understanding.
Got it. Yeah, that's a separate Audiogyan session altogether, where we can talk about standardization. I've tried to do multiple episodes on that, and I have a sort of very radical view on that. But we'll come back to that later.
I just want to add one insight or a conversation that I had once with a security guard. Right, this was part of the research that we did, and he told me that I'll never be able to enter a mall and enter into a store which looks more fancy, right? I asked him why. Because, for me, some of these spaces are not accessible, because once I enter, there'll definitely be a security guard or a person in the store who will follow me, right? And that's not something that I really would put myself into. So I know which are all the places that I can go and I cannot go. And I wouldn't go to places which doesn't feel that I can welcome, that probably can welcome me. So which essentially, after the conversation, I started seeing that, let's say you or me, when we are walking into, or when you're like probably driving in a city, you can stop anywhere and enter into any of these places. And if you want, you can eat. If you want, you can purchase. Even if you can do window shopping. And in his view, even though he's not really been banned, but there is a sort of restriction which the society itself has put, right? He doesn't want to go.
Or the person itself has some baggage
around
with
it. It's not really like a baggage, because he probably has faced it, and that's where the statement comes from, right? And some of these stuff is where technology should be helping in normalizing stuff. If you ask me, is it actually doing it? Probably not. Maybe we should move towards that as my.
Interesting. I mean, that's a great segue to the main topic of this conversation, is that India needs sort of bottoms up designing. And we spoke about this, and sort of, I would say, like, you are the better person to tell me that gone are the days of we making Uber for India, or like Airbnb for India. Like, there are now a good amount of products who are designing for India, looking at the Indian audience. So any things that you can share about these startups, or how are they solving these problems in a unique way? You have interfaced with like a couple of founders, bunch of founders actually. So you want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you're right. Like, probably we're no more looking at the West, or there was a brief period where we were also looking into China to pick up some of the interesting models to implement for India. Very recently, there was a Y Combinator startup from Africa, which pitched themselves as Misho for Africa, right? And that I felt like very proud. Like, even though I have nothing to contribute to it, I think this is a shift, right? Where Misho becomes a term where other startups are using to say that this is the similar startup that we're building for our own country. So in that way, I feel like Misho, ShareChat, Katabook, and even PhonePe. PhonePe is an incredible example, right? They've all actually weaved themselves into our lives, and we use them day in and day out, right? So all of these apps have been able to successfully replace some parts of our daily life. For example, if you look at Katabook, so what does Katabook do? If you look at Katabook's design, it's the most simplest design you'll ever see. All you'll see is like, you enter, it has like two buttons which says that, are you supposed to receive or are you supposed to like give, right? So, and it shows like a simple ledger. So what they have essentially done is they've taken the notebook or the paper sort of ledger that the shopkeepers used to write saying who owns how much. And they just converted it into a very simplistic design. Right. So let's say for me, it's very difficult for me as a designer to think in such a simplistic manner, because I will definitely add 10 features to it. Because I can clearly say I can add like 10 features to it. But the fact that they stripped off all of it, just looked at it from a first principles approach, go sit with a Kirana store owner. How is he handling business on a daily basis? What does he require? All he requires is a simple tool where he can keep a track of all of how much is being owned and stuff. On top of that, they keep adding a lot of new features, right? So for example, in the offline world, I can actually interface with the other person only when they actually come to my shop. Today in Katabook, what you could offer do is, in case if you have their phone number, you can actually send a reminder, right? And they can pay the amount, that the balance through a UPI or whatever.
But is this not designing feature a conscious effort, or is it because abhi chal raha hai वैसे चलने दो types?
I think only time will tell. So I think, let's say, for example, if all of these, most of these interesting startups that I'm talking about are just like 4 years old, 5 years old type, right? And if you're saying that, they have to become a part of our lives for a larger set of audience, imagine all the people who have done this before, like say Mahindra, Bajaj, they've been across for decades, right? Maybe we should at least see a decade to see that, if the simplicity will last, or all of them will also jump into the bandwagon of saying, oh, we'll add more features and stuff. So I think only time will tell. I'm liking the phase that is there right now.
Beautiful. Cool. Let's take a short break here. We'll be right back.
Hey everybody, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. We're so excited to bring you our next podcast by our favorite Tamil storyteller, Kavita Jiva. Venvalseni is the story of how the Tamil kings and kingdoms united to keep South India independent of Ashoka's rule. On The Habit Coach, Ashton speaks to psychiatrist and podcaster Dr. Fred Moss. They discuss ways to deal with discomfort and boredom. On Think Fast, Varun and Suchita give us key highlights from the 2022 budget and discuss the success of audioware company Boat. On The Longest Constitution, Priya takes a look at how courts interpret cases of colorblindness and maternity relief at the workplace. On Press Decode, Sarah Vagda and Prafula talk about China's media censorship and Bharat Pay's infamous co-founder Ashneer Grover. And on Pulyabazi, the hosts discuss how much the government spends on defense in their special series Ek Sawal Kahi Jawab. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our others for that matter, please do tell a friend. Don't forget to rate us on any other platforms that you're listening to us, whether it's a rating, whether it's a review, it all helps. And do remember to check us out on YouTube. We have a number of channels. They're available on ivmpodcast.com/YouTube. And finally, I would like to thank our sponsors this week, Bank of Baroda, CoinSwitch, Kuber, and HDFC Life Insurance. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Okay, welcome back to the show. And then how are these organizations finding these problems to solve? I mean, I've heard stories. I work at Jupiter. We have a community. I've heard like a lot of stories where founders, especially Misho kind of people, who are just actually going into WhatsApp groups and observing and chatting and having that real experience of talking to the users. So any insights there? Like any other startups who are doing this at a very grassroots level?
Yeah, I mean, very surprisingly, a lot of the interesting startups that I love have always started from some use case around WhatsApp. Right? Even ShareChat's founders, they started their journey where they said that, they founded a Facebook group where people were just sharing high resolution pictures of cricketers or actresses online. And they decided that they wanted to do an experiment. They started a WhatsApp group and they asked people to join. So it started filling, right? And that's how they realized, okay, there is a demand for people to actually consume this sort of a content. And initially, ShareChat started as a platform where you can find interesting status to share in other platforms. That is why it's called ShareChat, right? And later it became a network by itself. So I don't know if there's a systematic way for these, like most of these founders, to find these problems. I think people are just lucky that, they find something interesting, they start building on it. All we see is just the 1% of the people who succeed, right? There might be 99% of the people who would have found some other problems and they wouldn't have succeeded. So it would be a selection bias if we kind of rationalize only with them.
Yeah. Actually, on that note, I would like to share something which clicked just now, as in like which I had done before. So I have a friend who's sort of like a monk. He stays in Calcutta, Belur Math, like nearby. And he started like sharing a small snippet, like just one small PNG JPEG on a WhatsApp group. And everyone in his locality wanted to read the Gospel of Ramakrishna Paramhans. It's called E04 Kathamrita. With like one drop of Kathamrit, like one drop of nectar or something. And he reached out to me saying, hey, like, can you give me like a small JPEG, which I can templatize? So I have to just change the text and keep the Ramakrishna Paramhans photo there and like give like a slightly spiritual look to it, and I'll start doing it. And I said, but why don't you use Canva? So he said, no, I don't like that and whatever. So he was using Canva at this point in time. So I made this. And for about a year, he was just doing this. Every morning, he used to send this one drop to everyone. He got a WhatsApp business account. He exhausted that limit. He got another phone. He exhausted that limit. And then he reached out to me saying, now what do I do? I said, like, make an app. So I made a very fancy looking app because he's a very close friend. It's got a spiritual touch to it. And he said, what is this? What are you designing? Like, I don't want this. I want exactly WhatsApp looking. And I was saying, how can I design that? So I just changed the WhatsApp color, the green, not to copy, like no copyright issues, but just the green color, but exactly the same, because he gave me that real insight as to everyone who's using just know how to call on the phone or use WhatsApp. They don't know anything other than that. So even generating an OTP and like doing that stuff, he wanted like super duper frictionless. So we actually made it, and it's got like now 5,000 plus downloads.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it's doing great. It's free, obviously, but
most people actually look at me surprisingly when I say WhatsApp is the best design UX that I have seen. Right? Most people would expect me to say either Cred or any of these fancy apps, but I genuinely believe WhatsApp has like one of the greatest UX. Because starting from your grandmother to mother, everybody is able to use it, right? Even if you can't text, it gives you an option to send a voice note and stuff. Like I remember, a few years back, there used to be this one infographic where they said that, hey, these are the startups that kind of deconstructed Just Dial's business model and became a unicorn by themselves. Right? You would see Book My Show, you would see Zomato saying all of these things Just Dial was doing, right? And there are people who picked one certain vertical of Just Dial and they became a unicorn by themselves. I think the next big thing is WhatsApp. Like deconstruct some of the behaviors on WhatsApp and you'll find the next $1 billion idea there.
Yeah. I sort of, even I concur to you, because it's almost invisible design. Nobody talks about WhatsApp design is because it's invisible, the highest form of design you want to achieve or strive for as a designer.
Yeah. So the most interesting thing is my dad actually forwards emojis. Okay, so he would have gotten this emoji from some of his friends. It could be the thumbs up and stuff. Like he doesn't know how to go and search for these emojis. Whenever he sends me a thumbs up emoji, there's a forwarded message, right? So he actually kind of figures out where I am sure he keeps a bookmark of saying here's where I have to go search. He taps on it and he just forwards me to send a thumbs up emoji. So do you want to hear a very interesting story about WhatsApp from one of my research, which is very fascinating?
Lending.
So not a lending story, because this was just the conversation was different, but he gave me a very interesting anecdote from WhatsApp. So we had this conversation around data sharing, privacy. We wanted to understand, do people even change settings in the apps, right? Or do they leave the default settings? So we asked this question to a person. He was a part of a sales team, not a very senior person, but he works under a manager. He said, yes, I actually have changed the
At WhatsApp.
No. He's a sales team in different. He's using WhatsApp, right? He's a normal person.
Okay.
So he said that the only settings that I've changed is actually the last scene on WhatsApp. Okay, so I switched it off. We asked him why, right? He said that every day night I actually I'm a part of a lot of these WhatsApp groups, and I start watching videos. There are a lot of people who keep sending videos in the groups, and I find them very interesting and they're very funny. So every day night before going to bed, I actually start watching the videos, right? Now, what happens when I actually keep the last scene on? My boss gets to know when did I sleep last night. Okay. The next day, when I actually go late to the work, he knows that I've been watching videos late night, and so I'm going to get scolded. So that is one of the reasons why I've actually turned off the last scene. And I was like, this is mind blowing. Like, this context would never happen in my life or anybody else I'm friends with. This wouldn't happen. But the fact that he in his worldview, it makes sense.
Yeah, totally. As they say in the design world, right? The details are the details, and details are the design. They make the design.
Yeah.
I was recently talking to one of the founders, and he said, like, just IP based welcome. Like, if you open the app in, say, Tamil Nadu, and there's a Tamil welcome greeting, just by making that small nuanced change, they got like a 30% engagement rate. Because people felt at home. So yeah, I mean, these are like very, very fascinating facts.
Yeah. When you even do a lot of usability testing, one of the things that you'll realize is we go with a lot of this, what we call like a dummy data, right? Because you're testing only the design, but that's not how people look at it, right? So I came up with this mental model of the content and the container, right? So as a designer, we focus a lot around the container as where the information should contain, and what is like the bucket and where we are putting them. And when you actually show to the people, they don't care about it, right? They just care about what is the content. So to give you a very simple example, let's say you're testing out restaurant menu, let's say on Swiggy, right? It'll be very difficult for them to give comment on just the buttons without knowing what is a dish, right? Or let's say when I used to do a lot of testing around loans, I used to make these beautiful cards and show to people, and they'll be like, I would never take this loan because this loan is 18%, right? And I would say that, no, this is dummy data. Like, assume there is some other data. He'll be like, how will I make decision? Because you tell me what is that information, what is the interest rate, and then I'll tell you whether the design is good or not.
Amazing.
Right? It's very difficult for them to deconstruct the content and the container, right? So that I think is something that has hit hard in my head in the last few years. It's not the same. I mean, for them, it's the same, right? We are focusing more on just the containers.
Correct. Yeah, I think you put it nicely. And in the start of the Audiogyan, I said I'm an instinctive designer. I think I learned it sort of instinctively because for last 5-10 years, maybe I've been just saying I can't design using lorem ipsum. I mean, then I'm designing the container. I'm not designing the content, and I need the content actually to. It's sort of communication design, or how are you representing your content? Yeah. Then what is your take on Booking.com and Amazon, where it's just scattered, it's just messy, but people get what they want? I give a parallel of this. I used to work in ClearTrip, and I give this parallel where Airbnb or ClearTrip looks like a hotel where you know where the remote is, where the soap is, where do you keep your keys and stuff. And Amazon or Booking.com is sort of your house, where the remote may be under your sofa, but you know where it is as a personalized form of where it is. And like everything is shouting and popping out. And in fact, I remember once I did like 2 people search on Booking.com, and it said perfect place for 2 people. And I said, oh, great, like great line and great positioning. And I just for messing around, I changed 2 people to 9 people. And some other hotel was saying perfect for 9 people. Exactly. You could see that I put that code in such a way that it just makes a sentence. So what is your take on that then? Like how good or
No,
bad?
it's a very personal thing, right? Let's say, for example, if you're someone who's building for repeated engagement, right? So you don't go to hotels frequently, but you go to home every day, right? So Amazon probably wants you to come there for anything and everything. And that's exactly how they have designed, right? Let's say, for example, let's take a mental model of DMart. DMart, if you go on a Sunday afternoon, it's a festival there, right? Starting from when you enter, you buy an ice cream, there'll be babies crying, and you'll see people pushing for deals, and you'll start buying anything and everything that you didn't even knew that you needed it, right? So it kind of resonates. Amazon is probably designed from that sort of a mental model, saying that, come here, find everything, whatever you want, right? Whatever you search, you'll find it. Like, you'll have appropriate filters and all of it. I like Amazon's design, right? Even if I don't like it, still like one of the world's number one company. So it doesn't matter whether I like or not. So they've been able to do. So they've been able to show the numbers. They've been able to prove something in terms of they have really great customer service, right? For example, let's take a use case for my dad or my mom. For them, the first time they order something, it comes to their home, they are able to get the cash. Otherwise, in a small town like Erode, I come from Erode, it's a small town in Tamil Nadu, the accessibility to a lot of products doesn't exist. Like even today, there is not a great bookstore that you can go and see, like, some of the best-selling books. For them, these websites and the apps are something that gives them a lot of this accessibility at a much more affordable cost. So you order them, you get it in their hand, and it also, like, both saying that, if you don't like it, you can return it. Right? For them, that is the customer service. Like I said, again, this app or whatever we think is the main touch point is just to plays a very, very small, minute role in their entire idea of how they place Amazon. Right? Once that trust is formed, the next time I know that I will have to go and search, add to the cart, and when I place the purchase, then it will come to my home and I'll be able to give cash. This is all they care about. Right? So for them, the customer experience is that, but we are too much involved into Figma and these apps, so we kind of over optimize on it. It should just get the job done. Right? And very recently, I've observed a lot of interesting stuff that's happening on Amazon. Right? So if you are buying like a household item, let's say you're buying a Dove soap, okay, and you're searching for Dove soap, and you will see different sorts of SKUs that comes. There is a single Dove soap, there is a 5-pack Dove soap. Now it lists out in the 5-pack how much does one Dove cost. For example, it will show that the entire pack is 209 rupees, and out of that, one piece comes to 53 rupees. That will be written in a small item, because that's how we compare, right? It's then Indian household will be making the most smartest choice. Is it better for me to buy a single Dove, or should I buy a pack? And what is the price comparison per piece? I think it wins. The design wins there.
Beautiful. Yeah, I could relate. When my mom goes for shopping, it's a similar behavior.
Yeah.
Cool. So we'll just change tracks and move to the last part of it, which is like, then what according to you, or which domains in India need this bottoms up thinking? Finance is obviously great. It will be great for me to learn.
Yeah. Financial inclusion is definitely is very close to my heart, and because I strongly believe that once you sort of build the capacity for people to achieve their dreams, which where money in most of the cases becomes a major blocker, and that means they will be able to generate more opportunities. Right. So for someone who wants to start like a kirana store or a condiment store or grocery store, for them, giving the advance to buy a new store will be the challenge. Right. So somebody is able to trust them, able to evaluate them. I don't know how, right? If the algorithms are able to, let's say, if this individual has been doing a lot of transactions on, let's say, PhonePe, and PhonePe is able to look at this trail and it has evaluated them to see, okay, this person can take a 1 lakh rupee loan. And now that boosts the confidence for them to actually go and start a small store. I think that's where we have achieved, right? So enabling people to move towards their dreams without finances, or the money being a blocker, will be a lot more improvement, let's say, for example, for the increase in the GDP of the country. Right. So I would strongly focus on the financial inclusion part.
Okay. And any other sector, any other discipline or domain? Education?
Health, I would say.
Health, okay.
Primarily because if you also look at a lot of households who struggle, who actually, even if they are in the verge of coming out of poverty, they go back to poverty primarily because, if not focusing on health, not focusing on health insurance becomes a challenge for most people to come out of poverty. Right. So in my priority, financial inclusion, health, and then comes education. That's just my sort of opinion.
Yeah, obviously. Yeah. Cool. And then what sort of mindset or what sort of mindset these Indian entrepreneurs or probably some listeners who want to start up, what would be the key things in priority that you have probably faced and say that, hey, like if you change your worldview or slightly change the perspective, this will help. Any thoughts there?
I have a very controversial sort of opinion on that.
Please, Audiogyan, I don't know how many listeners are there, but go for it.
No, so the thing is, even for like the startups who are building currently, they're moving towards this. They come up with this mental model of, okay, there is one India and I want to build for the entire India sort of a thing. Because again, like the one entire country doesn't exist. It's just, in my opinion, it's just union of states, right? The language differs, the culture different, how they think will be different. The way you're probably even building Swiggy for Delhi versus Tamil Nadu will be completely different, right? And I believe a lot of these services in the future will get there will be a lot of local players who will excel in the certain domain because they understand culture better. Right. So this is again like a very interesting sort of business model that I come across. I watch a lot of regional YouTube channels and I follow this one business channel which primarily talks about like different business ideas in Tamil. So there is a services company who has come up with this quote unquote scheme where they say you can start your own grocery store in just 99 rupees. Right. Wow. What they essentially do is if you are, let's say if you and me decide to actually start a grocery store, you go to them, they give you a web page where you can upload your inventory and they'll give you a URL and they'll give you a QR code, right? And they ask you to print out brochures about your, let's say the store name, whatever store, like, we're thinking about the Kedar grocery stores, right? We print brochures and pamphlet and we go and distribute in certain areas, okay? And the items that you're listed down on the website is something you can actually go to a wholesale and get it, right? Now, the thing is, as and when the orders come in, so he gets like a SMS, WhatsApp, or web page where he gets all the orders. And once the orders come in, they can go and fulfill it. Now, this is not the beauty part, that he also goes into the calculation of even if you take 200 customers per month, right? And if you get these customers as repeat customers, at the end of the day, you can make 30,000 rupees profit. Right. And these are actual services that happen in Tamil Nadu. Like I'm sure like the similar ones happen in different states. We're just not aware of them. Right. There'll be a time where all of these people will become their leaders in the market that they are working on.
Yeah, I think now that I'm thinking and you're speaking about Tamil Nadu, I think they are way ahead of multiple things. I mean, I've heard of people having WhatsApp groups and planning the next blockbuster also.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll share the link for the read. But yeah, cool. So yeah, before we take up the last question, which is the 1,000 Faces Club, any concluding thoughts or a wrap up of your article, which is Design Principles for the Next Billion? Anything that you want to conclude in as a takeaway for us?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that I've been pushing to a lot of startups these days is to, when you're thinking about designing for India, don't think individual, think of them as collective. Right. So, for example, the people that, let's say, the entrepreneurs or the designers or the product managers who are moving around, they might lead a lot of nuclear families and they can be living either individuals or they can be just living with partners. But predominantly, majority of the India lives in a larger family setup. Right. So, for example, when you're thinking of intervening even a smaller feature, you can't think just as an individual. You'll have to think as a collective, as what is the repercussion of introducing this app inside a family? How will the let's say the daughter-in-law will be perceived, or how will the man will be perceived, or how will the mother will be perceived, and what does it mean inside that family? Something we'll have to start thinking. If we don't think, somebody else will think. That's all I'm saying, right? Because that makes it much more closer to them. Otherwise, we are just thinking just in terms of individuals will get you only to a certain extent. Because other peers, most of them will look at it and say, this doesn't work for me. Right. So there is a book called The Supermarket Wala, right? It's written by this person called Damodar Mal, and he has actually built a lot of retail chains. And one of the interesting things he says that most of the Kirana store owners are known for relationships with the customers. Now he talks about a newer challenge when a new daughter-in-law goes to the husband's home, and she actually doesn't prefer to go to the grocery store nearby where the entire family is buying. Primarily because he starts judging if she asks for a new soap or a new paste or a new dal or any new item, because he would actually say that, this is not what you're supposed to buy. This is what the family usually buys.
Wow.
And then probably she feels the lack of privacy there, and that's where she starts moving towards supermarket. And he makes an interesting case about why supermarkets will come into picture, because it gives anonymity during the purchase and nobody's there to judge me, and I can pick up whatever I want and move ahead with my life.
That's yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah. So does it mean that you have coined any word for this? Because now that you say, it makes it very obvious to take these steps, because Netflix changed their brand campaign when they launched in India, where people were sharing passwords and hey, take the passwords because you're a one family. They changed the pricing model. I think one more company did the same thing. So maybe there shouldn't be a personalization, but a familiarization.
I haven't come up with a name, but definitely would be great to think about it. In fact, my article around why we should be thinking in terms of family accounts comes from there. Right.
Correct.
So we should start thinking collective, and that would make it more interesting, make it more inclusive, I believe.
Yeah. Even I was talking to one user and just asking that, how do you handle credit and debit? And he said, I use debit for all small transactions. And basically, if I have to use a credit card, it's basically I have to consult my wife. Because typically it's a high price point item, like a washing machine or a AC or a fridge. So he just said, ki, credit is wife and debit is me.
Yeah. So a lot of these decisions are very sort of collective. So similar note, a lot of these women buy gold for Akshay Triti, right? And you will see in many cases, women prefer to buy gold jewelry. And it doesn't make sense, because if your goal is to actually only buy gold, you can buy a gold coin, right? Because the making charges actually reduce if you just buy a gold coin. But they choose to buy a gold jewelry primarily because the moment you buy it a gold jewelry, it becomes their asset. When you buy it as a gold coin, it becomes a family's asset. Right. So which means tomorrow when somebody comes and asks, then the husband or the mother-in-law, the father-in-law, anybody has the right to actually take it and pawn it to get more money and stuff, because she's probably buying it for her daughter's wedding or to save her children's future. So she wants to buy it as a gold jewelry and keep wearing it just to save it from using it during the emergencies.
So India has many Indias, as a lot of people have said. Cool. But just to conclude, Dharmesh, the last question was Thousand Faces Club. What is it? What are you doing? And so we'll start that, and there's last plug I wanted to. But
Thousand Faces Club is a community for creators. It's completely different from the last 15 minutes, whatever I've spoken. It has no connection with whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I also feel that one is just like an exploration of a new me, right? I'm trying to explore something new in terms of Web3 and communities. Right. So Thousand Faces Club is essentially a community for creators where they could come together and learn from each other. Right. So what does a community mean by here is being a creator. You are a creator, you've been doing this for quite some time now. Being a creator is actually pretty much a lonely journey. Right. Very few people are able to cross the threshold of making it, and very few people are able to get the million followers or lakhs of listens or all of it. Right. But what does it take to become successful and famous in the online world? Nobody has really cracked it. And since we also don't know whom else to connect with, they face all the challenges that a small businesses face, but they have very less tools and very less support from it. And Thousand Faces Club is a community we are hoping that where we can bring these similar people together and they're able to share and learn from each other.
Great. So all the best for that. And obviously you have a bunch of articles, YouTube channel, you want to plug them. One is, I know, Substack.
Yeah.
But if you can give the URLs or tell our listeners
sure.
wherever they can follow you, subscribe you, and learn about the real India that you're exploring.
Sure. So I'm very active on Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter at Dharmesh Ba, the DHERMASHBA. At Dharmesh Ba, you can follow me on Twitter. So I write a newsletter where I mostly try and publish like once a week, but it's very difficult. But the newsletter URL is theindianotes.substack.com.
The Indian Notes.
Yeah, the India Notes, THE India Notes.substack.com.
Yeah, and D19, I forgot.
Yeah, D91 was the lab that I was building within Setu. So till the time I was inside Setu, I was building it. So I founded the lab. I was building it. But today there are two other folks who are actually brilliant folks who are running D91 labs. If you want to check out D91 labs, you can check it out at d91labs.org.
Cool. And obviously Medium.
Yeah, Medium. Yeah. So most of the time you can see the same thing in Substack. Yeah. So that's the same thing I'm posting in Medium.
Cool. Yeah, I think this is a good note to end this. Thanks, Dharmesh, for giving your time. It was really wonderful talking to you and got to learn a lot. Definitely want to have you again on Audiogyan where you can share more insights and more nuances of user research. I mean, user research is so fascinating. You can just like keep having layers and layers.
Yeah.
I know you mentioned about not getting into the types of user research and more academic part of things. So yeah, but would love to hear that as well sometime.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Kedar, for having me on the show. Hopefully, we can talk another time into like the different types of user research, which is a little more academic, but yeah, it'll be fun to talk.
Definitely. Cool. And all the best for Udaan.
Thank you.
Jay has been on the show, I think 2 times. One for Design Up and one for Where Are the Designers series. So, yeah, it's good to have him around. And you're right now working as like you're consulting.
Yeah, I consult. So I divided 50% of my time for 1,000 Faces and 50% of my time for Udaan.
Okay, awesome. Cool. All the best. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
We'll stay in touch. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Kedar.
And that's it from today's Gyan session. For show notes and more Gyan, visit audiogyan.com. If you like this podcast, please don't forget to check our other interesting podcast on IVM Network. You can listen to us on IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or any of your favorite podcasting apps. To stay tuned, follow us on Twitter and Instagram at IVM Podcast. And if you wish to connect with me, I am at Audiogyan Moments on Instagram. Until then, take care.
Are you looking for finance products and services that can enhance your personal finance experience? Are you looking for a space to talk about your financial product or service? And are you looking for a crisp talk show where the conversation is all about money? Well, your search ends here. Hi, my name is Anupam Gupta and I'm host of the Paisa podcast, and I invite you for the conversation about your personal finance on each Monday on the IVM Podcast app or the website or on any podcast streaming platforms. See you folks.
What is the workplace and how does your gender and body affect your right at work? Hey, I'm Priya Mirza, and on the Longest Constitution podcast, we critically examine the vision of the Indian Constitution and laws. In season 1, we looked at sex, gender, sexuality in India, and the landmark judgments which transformed our rights as citizens in this country. In season 2, we discussed the laws which shape the workplace and examine how ability, competence, and merit impact us, and much more. Join me, Priya Mirza, every Wednesday only on the IVM Podcast app, website, and all the major podcast streaming platforms.